Today I'm talking about one of my favorite taboos, parental regret.
There are parents out there who feel like they made the worst decision of their lives by deciding to have children.
As a huge nerd, I prefer to listen to talk radio while driving, specifically NPR, and recently I caught an episode of Audacious entitled I Regret Becoming a Parent. Needless to say, I found the subject matter quite audacious, and upon researching it online, it really is a hot potato of a topic. But I love talking about taboos, so I'm very excited to present parental regret. What's the deal with that?
So what's the deal with
parental regret?
I don't get it. Am I right, people?
Many of us grow up with the expectation of having children. It's an unquestioned milestone in life. After all, our parents had us, and everywhere we turn we hear how important starting a family is. How sad it would be to end up childless, alone, wasting away in a government-funded nursing home with nothing to show for our lives. So we go to school, get a job, get married, and have kids. Offspring are, after all, supposed to be our evolutionary destiny. And when that kid comes along, it will be a life-changing moment for us. A flood of neurotransmitters and hormones will send us into a primal euphoria, a baby high, which will show us a love we've never known. A love that can only be experienced by having a child, or so I'm told. We are so inundated with this narrative that many accept it outright, that procreating is the purpose of life. Only in the past decade have I noticed a push against this narrative through antinatalism. Antinatalism, the moral argument that it is wrong to procreate, can be traced back as far as ancient Greece. But over the past century, the concept has seen a dramatic rise in popularity. In 1968, Paul Ehrlich co-founded the group Zero Population Growth. They trumpeted essentially the same argument Thanos made a few years back on the silver screen. More humans means more suffering, so we should scale back. This movement would be pushed even further in 1991 by a rogue ZPG member with the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, which wants to phase out humanity altogether. These organizations are not related to parental regret, but they're important to show the rise of ideologies that push against the status quo. In cultures that fawn over fatherhood and especially motherhood, this is a controversial idea, but its rise in popularity is paving the way for even more taboo topics to be discussed. If we scale down from ideologies all the way to the level of the individual, we can examine parental regret. After all, rarely do individuals ever cite antinatalist arguments when deciding to not have kids, become child-free. They instead give very personal reasons, like, I value freedom and independence. With personal choice, we have full commitment to procreating on one side and child-free on the other. In the middle is the undecided, and you can lean one way or the other, but in the end we will all land on only one side. Where we fall on this scale is a choice we each have to make. Sometimes people are steered by others, and other times it's only through great soul-searching we pick a side. But this decision is not to be taken lightly. Once made, you are committed, theoretically for the rest of your life. You have to factor in that this is a dice roll. Your child could be special needs, severely so, in which case you'll need to play caretaker for the rest of their or your life. We could humor the idea that if push came to shove, you could flee, leave the child with its other parent or give them up to the state, but then you suffer the shame of disowning your child. You'd have to live with not only damaging your life, but those around you, when you simply could have avoided having the child in the first place. This commitment is so final that we'd like to pretend that everyone was 100% certain when the decision was made, or if it was an accident, that the parent will be 100% on board when the child comes along. Regretful parents are, as the name implies, those who believed they fell on the procreation side of the scale, only to realize afterwards they didn't. And the mere existence of these people seems to disturb many. Someone being coerced into having a child seems fairly realistic and likely. After reading up on regretful parents, I found it's not uncommon for a spouse to give an ultimatum that it's time to have children or get divorced. You could also come from a religious family that forbids abortion. Or simply, you could have been told all your life that having a child was the most rewarding aspect of being human, and you believed them. I understand all these occurrences, I think most people do, but what some can't swallow is regretting a child after you've had them. Those who have stepped forward admitting their regret have been met with significant harassment, even death threats. And because of this, it's reasonable to assume the percentage of regretful parents is probably far higher than we know. It's extremely taboo to admit. Online posters do so in anonymity for fear of condemnation. It's not something one would want to announce to the world. It runs the risk of being framed as unloving or a bad parent. There have been attempts, though, to quantify the amount of regretful parents. In 2003, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that 3% of parents disagreed with the statement, "The rewards of being a parent are worth it, despite the cost and the work it takes." But I suspect the actual figure is much higher, due to many being unable to admit to themselves they are regretful. When we make life-changing decisions, especially one like becoming a parent, which envelops your entire identity, our minds will do whatever it can to avoid cognitive dissonance. If you're on Team Parent now, you can either get on board or admit you've permanently changed your life for the worse. It's often easier to live in denial than search the depths of our mind for repressed sorrows. Because of this, I would suspect that those who are overly hostile to regretful parents are probably overcompensating for their own buried emotions. It would be an easy way to silence those intrusive thoughts and solidify that they are indeed a good, fully committed, loving parent. Harassment of regretful parents is obviously taking the issue too far, but the other side has their own extremes as well. Corinne Maier, a French psychoanalyst, wrote a book entitled No Kids: 40 Good Reasons Not to Have Children, and it contains some truly shocking statements. Now, it's important to note this book is kinda tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to provoke and be controversial, but Corinne upholds that there is still truth in all she wrote. Here are some quotes.
"The child is a kind of vicious dwarf of an innate cruelty. What hope is there of having a fulfilling sex life when a woman is forced to turn into a fat, deformed animal decked out in sack-like dresses? More murders and child abuse happen within families than outside them. Every family is a nest of vipers, all the reason not to add to your own."
And here is just a particularly sad chapter heading.
"You will inevitably be disappointed by your child."
Corinne has stated that she gave copies of her book to her children, only for them to toss it aside for Harry Potter, disappointing her further. In interviews, she bemoans missing out on art galleries and career prestige, although that's a little strange since she is a best-selling author. It's hard to swallow a lot of Corinne's regret because her imagined child-free life overflows with self-centered desires. Would the world have been better if she could have stayed out late and drank wine? Sure, Corinne would have filled her hedonistic desires, but is that all life is for her? That would imply that she values fleeting spikes of dopamine more than unconditional love for her children. Children who will now always know how much happiness they robbed from their mother. Corinne seems to have just gotten lost in what-ifs, hung up on paths not taken, and I think this is very important to understanding parental regret. Psychologist Dan Gilbert, author of Stumbling on Happiness, proposes that happiness occurs both naturally and synthetically. It occurs naturally when we get what we want, and synthetically when we want what we get. He sees no difference in quantity or quality between the two, and most people synthesize their happiness fairly regularly. When confronted with a choice, a permanent one that can't be undone, most people will be happy with the outcome they receive. Even if subconsciously they are not satisfied with the outcome, they will synthesize happiness for their outcome because there's no undoing it. It's a form of mental protection. It's just going back to avoiding cognitive dissonance again. This is known as the free choice paradigm and became well known following a study in 1956. In the study, 225 women were asked to rate the appeal of certain domestic appliances. After the rating, they were given the choice of 1 out of 2 of those appliances to take as a gift. After making their selection, they were asked to re-rate the appliances, and this time the women rated the one they chose as a gift higher and the one they turned down lower. We can view parenthood similarly. Procreating is a rather permanent decision, and thus creates a natural or even synthesized satisfaction with the choice. This means that even if someone actually does regret having kids, we're hardwired to convince ourselves otherwise. The only problem is, some people have a tendency to ponder life's alternate paths more than others, think of what-ifs, and this can actually rob them of the ability to synthesize happiness. they become unable to fully commit their mind to their choice, and thus are more unhappy, dwelling in regret. This would explain Corinne's regret and others like her quite well. A radio show on KQED summed up these feelings rather poetically. They described the wish to undo having children as pining for a ghost life, a path not taken that diverged the moment their child was conceived, a moment in time when a single choice split their life into two, and now they look across this sea of possibilities and see a ghost ship, carrying a life that offers more happiness, more opportunities, and more fulfillment that they can never have. Although getting us closer to understanding parental regret, a proclivity for pondering what ifs is simply not a good enough reason. These feelings go much deeper. A common theme I encountered with regretful parents is a total lack of intrinsic motivation to nurture. Many state that upon birth they felt nothing and continued to feel apathetic towards their child. So is this a normal reaction that we've just never talked about, or a new rising concern? There is no data to tell us if this is a rising problem or if parental regret has always been around. However, there is data to show that the lives of parents have been changing, and that might be at the heart of this issue. According to an analysis published by The Economist, time spent caring for children has more than doubled in the past 50 years. In 1965, mothers spent 54 minutes providing childcare and fathers 16. In 2012, mothers spent on average 104 minutes and fathers 59. That's a combined increase of 93 minutes and a total of 163. Nearly 3 hours that's now being devoted to childcare daily. We also need to consider that single-income families have dropped from 72% in 1960 to 37% in 2012. Dual income is a necessity for most families now. It costs a lot of money to raise a child. Even for families with children under 6 years of age, 50% more families maintain 2 full-time jobs than rely on one income, and this number, predictably, only rises as the child ages. It's no longer normal to split the responsibilities of life. Parents now share both the burden of providing an income and maintaining a household, and that sounds exhausting. Taking all this data, we can estimate the workload of an average parent. They work full-time, likely out of the house 10 hours a day, assuming an unpaid hour lunch and 30-minute commute, come home to spend an hour and a half caring for their child, assuming care is split evenly with their partner, and then they still need to take care of all life's basic responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, running errands, responding to emails, doing laundry, etc. If we're being generous, we're looking at 30 minutes of personal time before bed on a good day. After all, the child will need to attend soccer practice, music lessons, doctor appointments, go clothes shopping, you name it. If they're going to compete in today's world, they need every leg up they can get, since that's what everyone else is doing. The bar for what constitutes good parenting is continually rising, and parents have to strive for it with less time and resources than ever. And a break never comes. You can only hope that after 2 decades the dice rolls in your favor and your child is now self-sufficient. The role of mother or father looks overwhelming on paper, a nightmare, but many still consider the effort worthwhile. And that's because they get the baby high, the flood of hormones, and find an unconditional love that carries them forward. This has been studied and is not just a theory. Our brains rewire after childbirth. Infants trigger a release of oxytocin and dopamine during both positive and negative actions. This is why parents are willing to put up with almost anything: soiled diapers, sleepless nights, endless crying. The reward circuit is always firing to ensure there's proper motivation for nurturing behaviors. But all brains are different, and the effectiveness of this evolutionary trait falls on a spectrum. Unfortunately, some people just aren't blessed with this, or the neurological change isn't significant enough, and there's no intrinsic motivation propelling them through parenthood. I've read posts by mothers lamenting how cheated they felt. They were always told by other moms that having a baby was an instant, life-changing moment. A love blossomed and they finally found purpose. And for many that's true, but others never get that. They keep waiting, and it never comes. They're resigned to building those feelings themselves. The love for their child won't be immediate and effort-free, but built, manifesting only through continued effort. What we can surmise from all this is that parenting is really difficult, especially in our current times. And the only information that can help us in deciding if we want to take on that responsibility is anecdotal, personal tales of how one person felt in their journey as a parent. If we listen to all sides, we find that the magic of parenthood is not guaranteed. Regretful parents exist, and they seem to exist simply because they lost a genetic dice roll. For happy parents, the struggle is worth it, but for the regretful, the reward centers in their brain just aren't paying off. It's extremely important to hear these parents talk about their regret, because if we don't, we'll only see more and more of them. It's sad and it's real, but we can't pretend like they don't exist. We also have to remember that it's not their fault. They didn't ask for this lack of feeling. They didn't even know it was a possible outcome. They just weren't given the innate reward system that many mothers and fathers have, and there was no way for them to know this until it was too late. So it's important to listen, because we can learn from their experience. Every single one of us that faces the decision to have a child needs to understand you may be like them. Your brain may just not be equipped for parenting. It's a dice roll, and you won't know until it's too late. Only if you're willing to end up regretful. If you're willing to roll the dice on that, then you're ready to have a child.